short form content is where it's at right now. People have such limited attention, and we've talked about that multiple times in this conversation. But
so true.
Twitter, Instagram is not the place for your 10-minute video about your vision. You need to break it down into its individual elements, and that makes easy content.
Hey there, so we are talking about communications audits today. If your systems of communication have ever kept you awake up at night, or if you ever heard, I never got that email, and we all have, then that's a good opportunity to take a look at the systems that you're using and just make sure that you're leveraging them in the best way that you possibly can. Doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong, just means we can always make improvements. Today, I'm here with Jennifer Derrico from Santa Clara Unified School District. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is awesome. I know you've done some communications audit work in your district, and I'm just really excited to talk about it. Let's start off with a little bit about you. Who are you? What's your title? What's your role at your school district? What's your background?
Jen Derrico, Santa Clara Unified School District, Director of Communications and Community Engagement. I serve as the Superintendent and School District's Public Information Officer. This year is going into my 22nd year in education, 17th year in school public relations. It's been a really exciting journey. Part of it had been with you in my work on the California School Public Relations Association board as a past president, which is all really exciting. And I just have a huge passion for strategic communications work. I've gone through my accreditation and public relations journey, and I'm a huge advocate for helping especially our newbies coming into the field set themselves up for success and think about strategy and upping their own professional development in that world. And communication audit is a major way that goes into the research part of your strategic planning for communications. And I'm ready to nerd out and geek out with all of you on everything communication audits and research.
This is great. Well, I kind of, when I first started looking into a communications audit myself in a previous district, I was a little, to be honest, I was a little afraid of it. Earlier in my career, I thought, do I really want to ask the questions? Do I want to open the lid and look under the rug or whatever that term might be? What am I going to find? What am I not going to find? What will I be able to change? What will I not be able to change? And I was a little overwhelmed at first. So let's just start with, for the uninitiated, what is a communications audit? Talk to me a little bit about your experience having worked through one now. What kind of a high level, what would you say it is? Is it a more strategic way to look at your tools? Is it doing surveys? Like kind of just high level, what is a communications audit?
I will say, first, I just want to comment on, it is a vulnerable process. I could totally understand it, especially if it's not coming from you. It's like you're maybe new in your position, superintendent board saying, let's do an audit and get a communication plan going. It's easy to feel like that's a vulnerable space and you're going to be finding information about what you're doing wrong. It's not about what you're doing wrong. It's about that continuous improvement journey that we can all take to perfect our craft, get better at what we do, make sure first and foremost that we're reaching our audiences in the way that they want to be reached with the messages that they want to hear and where and when they want to hear it. And so it's actually an exciting thing that you should be open to. And you can start small and learn and grow over time and make your audits bigger. And so we'll talk a little bit about options. You can take a little baby step dive into communications audits, or you can do a full-blown one. I've done both ways, and so I'm really excited to share about that. But it's just taking a deep dive into what your communication goals are, who are your audiences, what are your core audience's needs. Are you meeting them with the strategies and the tactics that you're using them? How well are they? What are their perceptions of your district, good and bad? It's good to know those things. And then think about a gap analysis. So if there's a perception going in one direction around an initiative or your core values or your mission and vision of your district, and it differs from what you actually want those audiences to think, then you can use this information to inform your strategic communications plan so that you're moving people's thoughts and behaviors and actions in the direction you want them to go.
That's great. Yeah, and I appreciate that you kind of brought to light like a communications audit. Maybe you're coming here because that's landed on your desk and it didn't come from you initiating that process. And great advice, just lean into that. Just own the work and be really excited. I think just try to shift that mindset into just being excited about getting the information back that's going to make the tools that you use more relevant to your community and thus make you even more relevant and a stronger communicator. So good good point on that one.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's plenty of people that have that just kind of landed on their desk, and I can probably understand how that stings just a little bit if that's not coming from you initiating that process. So.
Yeah. So wondering.
But we've all heard, our boards have even talked about it. Like, communication is so critical to a district. So, so we kind of talked about what it is.
Yeah.
Now, just at like a basic high level, I know that, one of the things that we want to do is really determine right out the gate, what's the scope of the project. So what kind of tools do you have access to? Websites, phone, text, all those are pretty obvious. If you're doing other things like newsletters, Peachjar, like kind of bringing in that scope of the project. Obviously, you're going to be gathering data. So I want to talk through some of the ways that you're doing that.
Yeah.
Identifying, like you said, like the gaps and the challenges and the priorities in your messaging, and do they understand the core values and services that you offer as a district that doesn't align with the public's perception? Then this is a great time to figure out how that communication audit can help that.
Yeah.
And then developing a strategic plan and actually implementing a new communications plan.
Yeah. Which
I know you're really big on strategic planning as well, and really help guide CalSPRA through that whole process, which is fantastic. And so I know that your communications plan is probably really great, like just backed up by this data, because I know you're a huge data nerd as well, as I am. So we've kind of talked about the why. Just give me a basic kind of overview of what those processes look like when you're going into a communications audit.
When you're thinking about it, yeah. I would say at a really high level, there's 5 steps, and they align well to any kind of strategic planning process. As a 4-step process, you're going to go through, it's called the RACE model, R for research. So you want to conduct some research. A is for analyze. You want to analyze the research, determine what your priorities and your goals might be coming out of that. C is the communication and implementation. So to meet your goals, what is your communication plan? Okay. And then E is your evaluation step of your cycle. So you want to see what were the end results, what goals were met, what ones didn't quite hit the mark, what do you need to adjust for next time. And so the 5 core areas that you're looking at when you're going through a communication audit is to determine what your scope is. Okay. So you're looking at things like, are you initiating your own audit? Do you have goals that you're trying to meet by executing that audit, or was it asked, are you coming in new to cabinet and it's something that's on your superintendent's goals or your cabinet's goals, or is it coming from the board? Yeah. What kinds of goals do they have in the back of their mind when they're asking that? So you can kind of keep, you're going to determine how much resources you're going to need or have access to in terms of the number of staff, or how wide you can go with your communication audit. You're just looking at the things that are within your department's control, or are you expanding that and looking at school sites? Are you bringing in outside resources? Do you have funding potentially to bring an outside third-party auditor in to do a totally formal audit, or do you not have those kinds of time and funding resources, and that brings in the scope of your project to what's within your control? So is it going to be an internally driven process or an externally driven one? What kind of data do you already have? Are you already conducting communication surveys? How often? What kind of information do you have from that? And then what data is missing? That'll inform some of the scope and goals. What do you have access to? Is it surveys and interviews? Will you have access to do and conduct and support to conduct focus groups, which is a rich way of getting some more detail? Interesting findings that are coming back from survey results. You can ask the people who took the survey to help you understand some interesting findings from surveys. That's a good one. For the research, then you're going to actually go out and collect the data in those areas that you're wanting to audit. So if you're looking at your communication tools or your strategies, are you looking at your website platforms or social media platforms? How welcoming your school offices and your district offices are? Are your messages hitting home for people? Are you missing the mark? So you want to collect the data around that and then analyze that. And some things will kind of float up. We'll talk about that a little bit later, I think, in our conversation. So I'll save that when we talk about the analysis. And then when you start moving into the communication part, then you're writing your strategic plan of, okay, coming out of our communication audit, what are some 3 or 4 areas that are challenges for us that we want to address, that are priorities right now? Implement some adjustments to your communications plans, and then you'll evaluate the results and start over. Start on over.
That's awesome. So, and I hear a little of the APR process coming out and all that, which I'm sure we'll talk more about as well, because it does fit in nicely. So, all right, so we talked about that, kind of that why. We talked about kind of a broad, high-level overview. Now, what are you actually looking at? So digging into some of the details now, during an audit, what are some of those high-level critical things you're actually looking at?
Yeah. For me, when we've done it both ways. When I first came into the position 10 years ago, there was not a lot. When you talk about scope, at the time, the scope was very small. I was a department of one, low budget. There was not budget to hire a third-party person, but there was definitely support from the superintendent and the cabinet and the board at the time.
That's great.
To do this kind of strategic work to inform and get the most ROI out of the work that we were doing. And so at that time, we were looking at things like what newsletters were we putting out, with what frequency, what kinds of messages were happening in those, spending time going out instead of creating individual focus groups, which can be pretty labor intensive and can be cost intensive. We looked for areas where people were already meeting, and I asked to be invited onto agendas strategically over the years. So I met with the district council PTA, I met with our management team, our district's cabinet. And so there's some things that you can look at and do kind of at a low level there. And then you can also go all the way up to something more formal. And so in 2018, we actually in Santa Clara Unified conducted a full formal audit with an outside consultant who came in and did multiple focus groups. And so then you're looking at things like you're calling in very specific types of parents. So we knew that we were having a hard time reaching families who were socioeconomically disadvantaged, working multiple jobs, not as responsive to our surveys, families of English learners, and we wanted to hear more about how can we reach them, and they just are not the typical people who respond to surveys. So we dug more into that. So it can be anything from your websites and text messaging and email, our one-way communications, to trying to solve a really challenging problem like how to reach your English learners' families.
Yeah. So you said something in there about bringing in a consultant. So somebody from the outside, an external entity coming in and doing an audit. Let's talk real quick. What are the pros and cons between doing it yourself and bringing somebody in from out of the house? Yeah.
I think doing it yourself, the pros are that you're not asking a lot of resources, and it's not as resource dependent in terms of the amount of time that you're spending on it potentially. You're not asking for money. You're not asking for more people. Budget, and so it's a good option for a one-person shop or a lower resourced department or school district. And you can still get really, really rich information from the platforms you're already on. So you can look at things like your social media data, your
mass notification systems.
Yeah, your mass notification systems. You can talk to people in groups and meetings where you already are and get some really good information from key stakeholders. So it's a low-hanging fruit win. I think you can do it anywhere for relatively low cost. The benefit of using an external auditor, for me, and if you can make the case and get the support of your superintendent or your board if you need it, is that you're truly getting an independent third party's evaluation, fully non-biased. It's a lot more formal, and depending on how much budget you're able to get to support that work, you can really broaden the scope and go pretty deep. And then you can kind of really dig into perceptions and get into perceptions even by subgroup. So it's not just all parents. You can look at parents more broadly, and then you can also dig into harder to reach segments of your parent stakeholder group and make some really specific strategic plans. And so that is a benefit of using a third party person, because you can get a little bit more into the details of informing longer term strategic plans that way too.
That's really great. And I already feel like if you have to make pretty high level changes or significant changes to the way you're doing things, or maybe adopting a new platform or something, you can always just say, hey, it was the auditor. They said to do it. It wasn't me. I'm sorry, I need more money for my department. I didn't come up with the idea though. Yeah. So
I need more people. I need 3 more people.
The auditor said I needed people. Yeah. That's really good. Thank you very much. I think that really clarifies. And the fact that you've got experience both those ways, it really says a lot. So I appreciate that. So let's talk about some of the specifics you mentioned earlier. And let's just start with phone. What kind of things are you looking at as far as your mass notification system goes and sending phone calls, the data, anything come back through the audits or anything that you've thought of or found that have surprised you or?
For calls?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's a good question. We have recently switched over to a new platform that allows us to do the traditional one-way mass notifications, but we can also dive more into strategic two-way communications with our families, which is really great, and get data on both types of strategies. And I think what's interesting about phone is people are just really busy. They screen their phone calls now, so it's very rare you're going to get someone who's going to pick up a call when the phone rings, and so you're relying on short form information that they're going to, hopefully they'll still listen to the voicemail that you've left for them. But when parents are really busy, it's not something we use a whole lot anymore. I'll be honest, with phone call, our strategy has shifted a lot over the last several years to reserving the phone calls for truly urgent situations.
Makes sense.
And it trains your parents too that they don't see your district in their phone log very often, and so when they do, it typically is an urgent situation. They're more likely to actually pick up the phone call because they know that that's usually the type of call that you're sending them. So we really do reserve that for a true emergency because we want our parents to be responsive in those moments.
That's great.
And so I think that's one way that things have really shifted for us, and that came up in our communication audit for families, that they just didn't want to receive phone calls about non-urgent things. And so, listening to our audience and what their needs were did not align to what we thought the best practice and the strategy had been, and you go a different direction with it, right?
Yeah, because things shift and change over time. I want to talk about text, but there was a time where all of us at the districts, I remember talking to each other years ago, like, can we text families? Is that okay? Are they being charged 99 cents a text or not?
Are we interrupting their dinner?
Yeah, are we interrupting their, and another thing too, with the all calls, we did an audit in my previous district, just an in-house audit, but we found out a couple of things. One, we found out that parents really hated getting calls in the middle of the day unless it was an emergency, because it just freaked them out.
Yes.
Like, what's going on? What's wrong?
As a parent of young children, I agree.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah.
So if that's something you are still doing, you might want to really reconsider making sure you know when those calls are going to go out and you're setting it up the right way, because a call in the middle of the day can be really disruptive. And just in the environment that we are in now with tragedies and different crises that we're dealing with across the nation, that can be really alarming to a parent. We also found out in that audit that we were sending out well over 1 million all calls a year. Wow. And digging further into the data, discovered that parents were only listening to about 6 or 7 seconds at most to like 1 or 2 minute phone calls and then just hanging up. Yeah. So we had totally burned that mode of communication, to your point.
Yeah.
They're just busy, they're overwhelmed, and getting them to pick up the phone and actually listen to the entire thing is slim to none. Yeah. So really looking at your community now, you might be in a community where, you just know your parents are checking their emails. And phone is their preferred method, but that's what the audit's about.
Right.
Finding out where that space is and where you need to go to meet them, and then do that. Because if you find out you're the one sending the emails and your parents are all saying we want phone calls, it's good rock to unturn and discover that you need to make a shift.
Yeah.
So let's talk then, kind of dated ourselves a little bit, because I remember when we were all having conversations about texting, because there was a time where text messages cost money. Yep. And there was a real concern about, are we able to text or not? Right. So talk to me about texting. Anything surprising you found there? Any kind of anecdotal evidence to share with going through the audit process and text?
Yeah, I think people do have more tolerance or even preference to text messages now. I would say there's still, just to jump back a little bit back to the calls, yes, most parents don't want to listen to a call for very long, but there are still some pockets of your families who that is still a strategy for them. So families of English learners where they might not even be literate in their home language, let alone your main language of English. They're looking for phone calls, right, from their communities. And so it's good to ask those questions in those spaces. You might want to go to your PTA and you might hear something really general, like we actually prefer text messages and then point us to a website landing page or a email for more details. And other families are going to tell you, I'd really prefer to get a text message or use another platform where we're having group messages in apps as a preference for them. For sure. But I would say text messages is a great way to get short form information out to families.
Yeah.
You don't want to abuse that there
Yeah.
either, and you want to be attuned in your communication audit to pay attention in your mass notification system to see what kinds of messages from whom and how often are families getting text messages within your system.
Yeah.
Because you're going to definitely inundate them. If you're looking at a family in your system and you go and look at their student and you see that they've gotten, an ice cream social reminder for the
Yeah.
5th time from their elementary school, and then their middle schoolers got, whatever permission slip came in by text message, and then at the same time you've had 3 different departments in your school district send a message out. That's a lot in a day. So you want to be strategic with it for sure, but it is a really great way to catch especially busy parents, because they can, covertly in a meeting or at work quickly look at a message and decide for themselves in that moment whether they want to click on the link to get to more information now, or make a note to go into that later when they have a little bit more time. And they can also not be, made nervous by a phone call in the middle of the day at work about their children.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah, the texting is great, and like you said, really attending to who has access to it too, and looking at that data. We know teachers are sending communications, principals are sending communications. At the district level, we're sending communications, and that can get very overwhelming if you aren't, in fact, tracking some of that data and really looking at how you're leveraging these tools. That's a really good point. Okay, let's talk about a big one, and this is personally, this one's a big one for me, just because I've done so much work on teaching, people, even at like the state level and different things, other districts, about this particular thing, because I think it is such a critical component of marketing, branding, information sharing, all of it for your district, and that is websites. So talk to me a little bit about websites, anything to share there, going through a communications audit, surprising things, anecdotal things that have come out of that process.
Yeah, what a beast. Websites are a beast. That's a big one. That's a hot topic. I think it's a topic that's on so many of us school communicators' minds right now. A lot of us are making shifts to new platforms. The summertime is like a great time to really focus on website cleanup, types of information that should be there. For sure. But the things that you're looking at, you tend to think of your websites as a place where your current families are going to, but that you also need to attract your prospective families and prospective staff members. You want to attract and retain highly qualified staff, and you also want to attract families. And so that's your first opportunity often for both of those key groups to make an impression. And you gotta approach your website through the lens of someone who doesn't know anything about your organization and what you have to offer, and make sure that you're putting your very best forward for them in terms of how your brand is showing up, from anything from your visuals. Are you making an impression, or are you sending people back into the 50s with your website? You want to think about the kinds of content people are looking for. So are you highlighting your best outcomes from your unique programs for students on whether it's your school site websites or your district website? Are you making sure that prospective staff members are finding out what the benefits are for them joining your school district? Is it easy to find the information from your homepage that they're looking for? Are you digging into the search functions on your website to see what kinds of keywords people are looking up, and then going to those landing pages and seeing what they're finding, whether it's impressive or not? What is that experience?
Have you created a pain point, or is it easy for them?
Yeah. And then for your current families, you want to keep them feeling like you're keeping them front of mind too. So, are your bell schedules easy to find? That's the number one thing. That is the number one thing that they come like, I can't find my school calendar. I can't find the bell schedule. I can't find the staff directory. I need to pay up my lunch, the lunch balance. And they're looking for really specific resources. And maybe while they're there, the stuff that's around those resources are interesting. They might get them into a little click funnel to learn a little bit more. But you got to make sure that what they need, they're finding quickly.
So cool. It's so true. And one other avenue too that we didn't talk about yet is email and how you're managing that through that mass notification system kind of piece you had talked about a little bit. So anything that came out anecdotally, anything to share about email as you went through a communications audit?
Yeah, I would say email. I would almost lump, just for the sake of this portion of the conversation, email and newsletters in the same types of categories of the interesting findings that came up in our communication audit in terms of how families say they want to consume a large amount of content, because our emails tend to be content heavy. We are communicators, but we can't over communicate as well. And some of the things that came up, especially for busy parents, busy staff members even, is, they're looking to skim. The attention is low, and when they're going into the email inbox, you're competing with all kinds of emails that are in there, and they're opening up your emails or your newsletters. They want to be able to scan quickly across the headlines. What came up in our audit was the information's really great. We want really short, easy to scan headlines.
Is it relevant to me?
Where they can kind of go through the headlines and find the sections that are the most interesting to them. Put your key information in bolded letters or in bullet point format that can consume the key details quickly. And then maybe you can link out. So they want shorter blurbs, headlines, bullet points, and then links to more detailed information if they want it, so that they can kind of scan through things quickly. And it has changed the way that we send out emails to people. And then you also want to be really specific in your subject line so that people understand the topic, and if there's an action that you're requesting of them, that you include that into the headlines so that they're more likely to get that increased click-through rate. The open and click-through rates on your emails for sure.
That's really good. And Leslie Brewington asked me once, like, do you track the word count in your email? It's like,
oh, the word counts,
No, I don't.
That's a good question.
Probably should. But something you said reminded me of that. It's just attending to those details because you're right. Parents need easily digestible information. They need to know how, if it's relevant to them or not really quickly. Otherwise, they'll just put it down likely and probably tell themselves, "Oh, I'll get back to that." I have to admit, full disclosure, I'm that parent. I'm like worst case situation.
Same.
For my poor school district. Annette Franco at Newport Mesa. I promise I read all the emails. All of them, probably. No, they do a great job in Newport Mesa, right? And I love Annette. But I am that parent that's like, okay, something came out, I'll get back to it. And I would say several times a week, I don't. So we've got to be really careful. So think about it through the lens of a parent. So maybe you are a parent in your district, or you have kids in another district. Really put that parent hat on when you're creating these tools, using these tools to create communication that, is this something that's easily digestible? Is it easily to identify if it's relevant to that family or not? And just kind of another way that without even doing a formal audit, you can just make sure you're tweaking your systems right now today to make sure that they're as effective as possible.
I'd say the same. I mean, the same for any of your audiences that you're go through each of your different audiences in your audit and think through the communication flow. What are your regular touch points of communication with them? Are the messages that you're putting in them the ones that you want them to hear? Are they hearing it multiple times and hearing it the way that they need to hear it? And so you can apply that to, our conversation right now is focused on families, but you can apply that to staff, to how you communicate with your management team, how you communicate with your community, with your board, with your cabinet. You can take a deep dive into all of those things, and all of this applies, whether it's email or newsletters.
I can hear Tom DeLapp saying, "Don't bury the lead." I didn't do a very good job on Tom's voice. Don't bury the lead. All right, so let's talk here about social media. Anything anecdotal, anything kind of come out social media? How are you leveraging the tool now? So kind of straying away from communications audit just a little bit, let's weave it in. But I know that many of us through the pandemic in particular kind of shifted some of our strategy. I know I did. I was one of them that towards the latter half of the pandemic, I shifted from my social media really being a space for a lot of my informational news to more of a cheerleader for the district. I don't know if that was, why exactly, maybe it was just I felt like I really needed more positive messaging out there and bringing everybody back to the space. We're all back to school now. Everything's going amazing. The kids are doing great. But, that was kind of a conscious decision that I made, still making a space for information, making sure all my families knew every year that it was going to be a critical line of communication in the event of a crisis or emergency. So stay tuned. Make sure you follow our social media feeds, because it is where we will be sharing real-time relevant information if we do have an emergency or crisis. But I did kind of pull back just a little bit from, or I guess maybe I just got more strategic in that I started asking myself, does this need to go on social media?
Right.
Or is this better through another method? So talk a little bit about what you found.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting topic that you and I have dove into. This is where you're going to vary a little bit from a strategy that we've learned: create once, post everywhere. And it's easy to get into the all right, we sent out our district newsletter for the second time this month. We're just going to throw the link with a graphic on social media too, and on our website homepage.
Yeah.
And drop it there. But you can do an audit on your social media too. You can go in and see, the different types of posts you're going out. You can do a content analysis on that too. You can theme them out and say, okay, when we're putting out newsletters or board briefs or, whatever kind of the main top communication that you've put out at the time is going out, and you have 3 clicks on it.
Yeah. Is it
but your
engaging?
audience is thousands, right?
Yeah.
And versus the highest one that we had at one point was a student visiting a farm in our school district, and it was a student with our farmer, and it had the highest engagement, right? And so it gives you, that is telling you that your families, your staff that are following you on social media, your community, they want to peek into
what they want.
The story of your district. They want to see what is unique about your district. They want to feel like they're coming into your classrooms, and education in our classrooms looks so different now.
Yes, it does.
Than a lot of our communities knew. And so I think what we learned in the pandemic that I think you're touching on, and that I certainly have reflected on, is that we leveraged social media at a time when none of us were face to face any longer, and we were missing that in-person contact. We wanted to be able to provide that personalized communication to people, and so we use it that way too, right? We put out our just-in-time information there, but that was also how we kept our community connected when they couldn't be in our classrooms any longer. And as we were reopening, access to classrooms in our schools was so limited, even to us as communicators. And so I think we learned a lot, that people actually wanted to see our communication platforms and social media to be used that way. And I think there's a lot that we can continue to learn from that. We certainly can in our own school district. We're really rethinking our social media strategy. We'll be spending time in that this next year, and we'll be doing our own communication audits, internal.
Awesome.
This is something we can do with our team within our control, and dive into the types of, on each of the platforms, even people behave differently. They want something different in Instagram than they do in LinkedIn. And I don't know if your district's exploring TikTok. That might be something that's interesting to check out. We haven't made that leap yet, but as part of our audit, we'll check and see what some school districts that are on TikTok, what are they doing? Yeah. Who's their target audience? Yeah. Are those messages landing well for them? Is in a gap analysis, is that something that's missing in our own communication program to connect with people? I think it's really interesting to dive into that, and it's a great tool to tell our district story. Where our people are. They're scrolling in social media anyway.
Oh, so they are. They're getting lost in that rabbit hole. I've looked at a couple of districts doing TikTok. Seems like they're having a lot of fun with it. I've heard it's a really great way to connect with students as well, which is unique because often that's an audience that a lot of our tools just aren't geared for. It's parents and guardians. So you said a couple of things there. I just want to really make sure that are highlighted. One is our classrooms have changed. They're so much different from when we went to school, and like almost unidentifiably different from when our parents and even grandparents went to school, right? And so unless we're providing that level of access, and social media is a really great tool to do that, oftentimes your parents only know what's happening by what they're getting from their kids coming home, which could be very little sometimes. I mean, I'm sure you've sat around the dinner table too, and you're trying to figure out, how do I word the question so my kid actually tells me how their day was and what they did, right? Because you can't just say, hey, how was school today? Because you're going to get good, So unless you're showing the parents, it's not likely the kids are necessarily taking everything back and sharing what their day is and how amazing everything is as well. So really great way to do that.
Yeah. And your community, only 20% of your community is actually connected to your district, either through having children themselves or having grandchildren in the school district. And 80% are disconnected completely, but they're funding you. Yep. And so they're making assumptions about what you are about and what education looks like based on their own experience or the perceptions or sometimes ill-informed gossip out in their neighborhoods. And so social media is a great tool, I think, to give people a peek into how education looks different. If you have bond programs that are funding facilities, this is a great way to show the community who are not connected to your district how you're using their funds and your new facilities to provide education to students that looks different and is benefiting them in their future as well.
Another episode of Peachjar Extra Credit, I did a conversation with Carl and George at St. Louis Public Schools, and we talked specifically around advertising and budget for advertising dollars. And you mentioned social media being a great way to connect with a broader audience. Check that video out if you want to just get a deeper dive on boosting posts and budgets for that, and what that looks like, and the demographics and setting that stuff up. So that was a really good question, or a really good conversation I had with St. Louis Public Schools. They're having a lot of success in that area. You know, you said something else too about social media and just making sure that the content on social media is relevant for the platform, because if you're going and looking at the data and you're not getting engagement or reach or comments or likes or shares, you can really ascertain fairly quickly what kind of content is hitting. And I'm just telling you right now, what you are going to find, it's always the kids. So the kid related stuff, it's never your board briefs. It's never your board videos. It's not anything related to a talking head at your district. It's the kids.
Children and animals.
Anything, anything you, or better yet, children with the animals, right? So yeah, that's what, go ahead and look for yourself, but you'll find that's what the data bears out. But Andrea Gribble and I did episode as well on just social media. She's social schools amazing. For EDU. She's amazing. So check that episode out. We'll link in the description as well. But she said something in there that really struck home for me, especially just coming from the lens of Peachjar, which is something I want to talk about next, which is don't use social media for just your flyers and things. Like if you have district events, you know, state of the district, that kind of stuff, that's where you really look at targeted strategic communication and using the methods to get out there. Because if you're just putting stuff in your social media feed that drives down the really good stuff that we know is engaging, then your channel's not going to be more relevant. And because of the way the algorithm works, in fact, the really good engaging stuff is less seen, because your channel becomes less relevant. The algorithm works in funny ways. We don't all know how those work, but the mystery is, if you get a post out there that is really engaging, a kiddo petting a horse, for example, visiting a farm, that's going to get a lot of reach and engagement. And when that reach and engagement happens real fast, then the algorithm says, oh, well, more of your followers would probably like to see this too. And it gets it out to an even bigger audience. So you want to be really careful that what you're posting out there is relevant, it is engaging. Otherwise, the algorithm is going to kind of destroy some of your efforts to be relevant in that space. And so Andrea was saying, make sure you're not posting just bake sale flyers and things like that. Use a more strategic avenue, which takes me to Peachjar, which is where I sent all that stuff in my previous school districts, hiring flyers, like all the flyers and community things out through Peachjar, because it's just really engaging visual way to get stuff out there with interactive, you know, buttons and all of that for registration and signups and all that. So just kind of sharing that Andrew's experience there with social media, and to back up what you were saying, just making sure that content is relevant for the space.
Right. Yeah. There's so much data that's out there when you're doing your own audits and you're looking at the space. You know, look up the research about current for this year. Look, easy Google search, right?
Yeah.
Instagram best practices 2023. You know, there's. You definitely want to strategize and diversify within those spaces. Short form content is where it's at right now. People have such limited attention, and we've talked about that multiple times in this conversation. But
so true.
You know, Twitter, Instagram is not the place for your 10-minute video about your vision. You need to break it down into its individual elements, and that makes easy content. If you already have the 10-minute video, break the 10-minute video down into 10 parts, and now you have something you can push out twice a month for the rest of the year, right? And without a ton of, you know, additional time and effort, but you have to really think about your strategy and how to leverage your resources efficiently. So true.
If you are making videos, great point. Pull those out, shorts, put those shorts out there. You'll be really depressed at first to find out, like, that 10-minute video you worked really, really hard on.
Beautiful. It has a place.
It has place.
On your website landing page.
Exactly. You got to be doing it, but you'll see, like, on YouTube, maybe you get 300 views, but if you start breaking it up into shorts, you can see views in the thousands. So if you're not leveraging that strategy.
People will give you 60 seconds where they might not give you 10.
Yes, exactly. So that's very, very cool. It's about that strategic, differentiated communication and making sure you're using the right lines of communication for different things. Which is why I really like to kind of just go back to Peachjar, like mass notifications, breaking up the school flyers, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, like after school enrichment, school and district flyers through Peachjar. Now as a parent, when I get an email from my school or my district or my principal, I know, okay, that's pertinent to my child's academic day. Like that's that's critical information about my kid's school day. But if I get an email from the school through Peachjar, okay, I know those are my additional resources, like, you know, the after school enrichment programs and offerings that are out there in the community, the after school events, back to school nights, that kind of thing. So as a parent, it helps me more compartmentalize my avenues, since it's all coming through my email. We were talking about how parents can be overwhelmed. Now I know really quickly at a glance, kind of going back to what you're saying, is this relevant to me right here, right now, or can I come back to it?
Yeah. It's such a great point to talk about helping whatever your audience is to know what to expect and where.
When and where.
Timeliness, frequency, you know, you want to be consistent.
Yeah.
All of those things matter a lot. And I think helping them understand which platforms they go to for what kinds of information will help them be able to filter, you know, what to open today, what to open this weekend, what can wait for next week, and that they know how to get back to the information, which I think is really a really great feature of most of the platforms that we're using for different things now, right? Whether it's our newsletter or our mass comms platform, our families have been trained, okay, I can see this kind of information here. They can have it in their email, but most of those platforms have an, you know, on-demand content filter system they can get into search that. And the same with Peachjar, which is really great, right? We've trained them. They get the email if they want it there, but they can also get to the button from our homepage, from our footer. They can go search their school and look through to find the kind of information they want when they're ready for it.
I don't know if you set up scheduled distribution yet, but this is a feature I was asking about for a long time. You probably were too, asking Peachjar, but now you can
my comm specialist is really excited about that. I heard about it before I read the email. She saw the email first, and she said, "We can finally schedule." Yes, you won the hearts.
Yes, finally. So good. I'm glad to hear that was well received. I know it was something I wanted, which is just, in case you don't know, you can in Peachjar set up. You can go and approve flyers anytime, and then you set the date and time that email goes out, and everything's just bundled in one nice, tidy package, and it goes out to parents and guardians. And so again, it goes back to like, they know to expect an email Tuesday at 5 o'clock with all their enrichment opportunities. So
efficiency and convenience is really huge right now.
Trying to help, right? I know everybody's trying to really come together and support our schools and communications efforts. Speaking of support, let's talk about high-level management. So let's talk about executive cabinet, maybe even board, but that management team, how are they involved in the process of a communications audit?
You know, it depends on what your own goals are when you think about the scope of the communication audit that you're trying to do. You know, if it's just a shorter term goal, you have a really specific communication goal or initiative that you're working on. Maybe you're just doing your own audit on your own, if you're a team of one or with your team yourself. And, you know, then it's your conversation with your immediate supervisor, whether it's your superintendent or if it's something bigger. I bring up our communication audit and our findings all the time in our cabinet meetings.
I love that.
You know, and then that selfishly and strategically for me later on down the road when that communication audit they funded and paid for comes due for maybe a new one in 5 years out or 6 years out, I'm more likely to get the support again because they really see we got the big bang for our buck because Jen really used that audit and those findings to make changes
and hold people accountable to the results.
Absolutely, and you want to use the data about your own school district. We can come to conferences, which is where we are right now, and we'll talk about that I'm sure in a moment. But we can come and learn best practices from our peers, and we absolutely want to bring that learning back to our districts. But we also need to use the data from our own audiences to find out if the best practices that we're using are actually hitting the mark where we think that they are, and meet them where they are. And you're the expert on your cabinet. I hope you're sitting at the leadership table and come talk to us if you're not, and we'll help you advocate for that. But, nothing speaks more to members of your cabinet and your board than using data to drive your work. They're using data to drive their work and academics all the time. And so when we're bringing back data from our own audiences that back up the recommendations that we're making at that table, you're going to have a lot more support for even your strategic day-to-day work and your strategic communications plans. But you're helping your whole cabinet make better decisions about all of the programs in your school district when you do that. And so, ideally you have the support and you're able to build that in as you're bringing in the importance of using data to make decisions. It feels like an easy no-brainer. You're going to have to adjust your recommended scope of your audit depending on what those resources are that are available to you, right? You have to maybe come to the table with a couple of options. I've been really lucky in my school district to have have that support over time that I was able to build from a smaller internal audit to something larger over time.
That's good. Well, that's great. I appreciate you sharing kind of that experience that you've had. And I was remiss in not saying that we are here in St. Louis right now for the national conference here with INSPRA.
It's a beautiful space.
Beautiful space. Yeah. Union Station Hotel, downtown St. Louis. You can see the arch right down the street, which is amazing. Gorgeous conference location. But there's a lot of noise and setup behind us. So if at any time during the video you've heard banging or talking, it's because we are in a very vibrant, alive space right now as we get prepared to embark on a whole set of days of professional learning and development. So, all right, last thing I kind of want to ask, surveys. Because I know surveys are a big component of this. Talk to me about surveys, kind of what that looked like for you, how you leveraged that medium of gathering data.
Yeah. That's an interesting one, and something that we're actually, I can talk a little bit about what it had been and some of the conversations we're having right now at the cabinet level about surveys in our school district. I would say before we had the support to do a full deep dive in a communication audit with an outside consultant, that was an easy, low-hanging fruit thing we could do with minimal resources when I first came in the district. So we did a district-wide survey of all of our stakeholders. There's some really great communication surveys that are available if you're a part of your SPRA, whether it's like the state or your national SPRA. There's really great resources and survey examples that have been shared by peers that can inform your work there. It can be as informal as creating your own on Google if that's what you have access to, or a more robust survey platform like SurveyMonkey or some of the great vendors that are out there. For our school district, in our last communication, out of our communication audit, as part of our strategic plan, we started partnering with Project Tomorrow to do one of their surveys that are free. I think that's a really great resource that anyone can look into. It's absolutely free to school districts to participate in it. And what's in it for Project Tomorrow is that you're feeding their national data. And you get to benefit from that because now you can benchmark your results of your communication audit from using their Project Tomorrow survey tool against state and national data as well. So you can see where you track locally and at the national level, which is really great at the cabinet. Really appreciates that. That was an exciting project to implement. And part of the conversation that we're having right now is there is some serious survey fatigue that we probably are all noticing in our own organizations around getting people to just respond to them because we're competing with mental health and wellness surveys that are going out every year from our state or our local agencies, LCAP, intent to enroll, and re-enrollment, student information updates. And we're competing a lot for online surveys and forms and applications, and depending on the time of the year, our stuff can get lost. And so we're really thinking about the frequency of those communication surveys. So for us, our initial intention was to do an annual survey. We're now looking at all of our surveys across the district and doing an audit on our communication surveys, which is kind of interesting. So you can kind of do these spot audits, spot surveys, to get kind of snap information. That's something we're actually working on right now, summer 2023, is getting an idea of what our editorial calendar is of our surveys, what kinds of surveys are going out, from which departments, which month, which ones are crucial or required to do annually, which ones do we maybe want to cycle through. Communication surveys is probably one we will now move to an every other year, every 2 year cycle, but we'll continue to use a Project Tomorrow platform. Was really, really great. And we were able to add a few custom examples onto our survey, which is, amazing that our partners at Project Tomorrow were willing to customize our survey for us. So that also allows us to get communication audit type data back about whether we're hitting the marks and perceptions with our district's vision and our goals, and whether or not they trust us to follow through on our core values. Which is really interesting. And then other surveys that are available, I think NSPRA, since we're here, they have really great audits that you can use through NSPRA. Their scope survey tool, you can also, I think starting this fall, you'll be able to purchase that separately and just run their scope survey on your own. If you can't quite afford a full audit, it's something you could purchase their survey and get access to benchmarked national data there as well. So yeah, I think surveys is really interesting, but something to really think about if you're looking to go on that journey is you want to do your initial communication audit and really be thoughtful about the frequency.
That's cool. And you just mentioned a couple of resources that both, all of that sounded great. So we'll be sure to link that in the description.
Yeah.
So if you want a really easy way to find some of the things that Jennifer just said, just check the description box down below. The only thing I'll say about surveys, and I always said this in my executive cabinet teams, is don't send out a survey unless you're truly interested in analyzing the data and taking action.
Yes.
Otherwise, you end up, like we talked about in some of these other things, you just burn out that mode of communication.
Yeah.
And if parents and guardians don't have the trust that you will actually implement change, they're just not going to give you their time in the survey.
That is so true. And that is your role at the leadership table, is to really push that home to your leaders. Yeah, they're not going to continue to take the surveys and be honest with you in those surveys if they're not seeing the action, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, one of the big things that we were hearing back from our families is you're on too many platforms. There's a war for attention. We're overwhelmed, and so one of the most visible things we can do then is start to, kind of get our arms around the number of website platforms we were on. For example, we're a large school district, and we had, I think, 5 different types of website platforms that people are on. Our communication platforms, our families were really overwhelmed with that. And so over the last, we had to put our communication plan that came out of our audit on hold over the pandemic, but we've come back to that over the last year, and our families and our staff are now seeing us start to take some real action on what they shared with us in the audit. And when we communicate out these changes, we point back to the survey and the audits that they participated in, because we did a really robust audit. We asked a lot of our community to participate in it. We asked them to do one-on-one interviews with us. We asked them to do focus groups with us in addition to the surveys. And so we asked a lot of their time, and we want to make sure that we close the loop on what we did. And newer families now maybe didn't participate back then. So we want the newer families and staff to know that is something that we do, in a cycle, ask them for input about what their needs are and whether we're meeting them.
That's brilliant. Yep. Yeah. Demonstrate that work and the outcomes. All right. So we talked about a lot. Yeah. So there's a lot and a lot of strategies, tactics that you can leverage, things you can do in-house, things that you can talk, we kind of talked about what that benefit was going outside and having an independent consultant come in. Any final thoughts that you would have for anybody out there that's just not sure, haven't taken the steps to really dig in and look at their comm systems?
Yeah. Data. Use data.
Always data.
Use data to inform your work.
Yeah.
It's going to get the trust of your leadership around you, I think, the fastest. If you're using data to drive your work, drive your decisions, drive your recommendations, you're going to have so much more support and so much faster.
Agreed.
Data all day long, using that 4-step PR process, really thinking through.
That's cool. I laugh because so far in, I think, all the Peachjar Extra Credit episodes we've done, and some of them aren't published yet, data seems to be the one that all the seasoned comms communicators bring up. Data, you need data, you need to use data, and it's so true. And there's a reason that it's a common thread in all these videos, no matter what topic we've been discussing it always comes back to, you have access to the data, lean into and leverage the data.
We want to do our best work for the kiddos that we're serving, for their families, to the staff that are supporting them. We also, as human beings that do the work, we want to feel like the work that we're doing is the most effective it could possibly be. Yeah. And the best way to ensure that you're doing that is asking the questions and using the data.
That's so cool. Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here and doing this with me today. I know you've got a really busy conference schedule, so I really appreciate you carving the time out. You're just amazing and just a professional in every way. And I'm just so humbled to have you with me today. So thank you so much for doing this with me.
Of course, any conversation with Matthew Jennings is an amazing one. I always have a good time.
It's always fun. Well, I appreciate it so much. This is great. Hopefully you liked this. So be sure to like, share, comment, follow for more. If you have questions for us, I know either one of us would take your call anytime. So, don't hesitate to reach out, give us a call, shoot us an email. Get in the comments. I'll be happy to monitor those and jump in there too if I can answer anything for you. Check out the description for some of the links that we've talked about today. That's a long one.
It's a long one, I know. I will geek out on some research, APR, and 4-step strategic planning process any day.
That's awesome. Yes. Okay, well, that's it for now. We'll see you.